In the annals of African history, few kings have left as profound a mark as King Agaja of Dahomey. His reign in the early 18th century was defined by military brilliance, diplomatic cunning, and an extraordinary act that would echo through the centuries. Negotiating the return of thousands of enslaved Africans from Brazil to their homeland. This achievement positions Agaja as a pivotal figure in African resistance to European domination. The Kingdom of Dahomey. To understand Agaja's impact, we must first understand his kingdom. Dahomey, located in present-day Benin, was among the most powerful and organized African states of its time. Founded in the early 1600s, it expanded aggressively through conquest, establishing itself as a regional powerhouse with a centralized political structure and formidable military force. When Agaja ascended to the throne in 1708, he inherited a kingdom already entangled in the complex web of the transatlantic slave trade. The European presence on West Africa's coast was intensifying. Portuguese, British, French, and Dutch traders were establishing forts and trading posts, forging alliances with local rulers. Many African kingdoms, including Dahomey, had become enmeshed in this network, capturing prisoners of war and selling them into slavery in exchange for European goods, particularly firearms that reinforced their military strength. A vision beyond subjugation, but Agaja was different. He refused to be merely a junior partner to European powers. From the start of his reign, he embarked on ambitious territorial expansion. One of his greatest achievements was conquering Alada, a rival kingdom, which solidified Dahomey's regional dominance and increased access to European traders. Despite his kingdom's participation in the slave trade, Agaja recognized a critical threat. The growing Portuguese influence endangered Dahomey's sovereignty. European encroachment wasn't just economic, it was political. European powers sought to control key coastal ports, and Agaja understood that maintaining control over trade was essential to preserving Dahomey's independence. The Conquest of Whydah. By the early 18th century, the Portuguese had established significant presence along the slave coast, serving as primary facilitators of the transatlantic slave trade to their Brazilian plantations. Agaja's relationship with them was tense from the beginning. His main concern centered on Portuguese control of Whydah, a crucial port city that had become one of the primary hubs for slave exports. Control of Whydah would allow Dahomey to dictate terms to European traders and retain economic autonomy. In 1727, Agaja launched a decisive military campaign to capture Whydah. His forces, including the legendary Dahomey Amazons, an elite regiment of female warriors, overwhelmed Portuguese defenses. This conquest was transformative. It gave Dahomey control over one of West Africa's most important trading ports and sent an unmistakable message. Dahomey would not be subjugated. The capture of Whydah sparked broader conflict with the Portuguese, who retaliated by forming alliances with neighboring kingdoms, supplying them with firearms and encouraging rebellion against Agaja. But the king was both skilled diplomat and formidable warrior. He navigated these challenges through military force and strategic alliances, maintaining his grip on power. An unprecedented achievement. The most remarkable episode of Agaja's reign came next, his negotiation for the return of thousands of enslaved Africans from Brazil. This extraordinary event demonstrated both his diplomatic skill and his commitment to his people. Brazil, under Portuguese control, was one of the largest importers of African slaves. By the early 18th century, its African population had grown significantly, with many slaves originating from Dahomey. These enslaved Africans endured brutal conditions on sugar plantations, facing high mortality rates and sparking numerous revolts. Agaja's campaign against the Portuguese wasn't solely driven by economics. It had a deeply personal and moral dimension. He recognized the suffering of his people in foreign lands and sought to bring them home. After his victory at Whydah, Agaja leveraged his newfound power to negotiate an unprecedented deal. The details aren't fully documented, but it's clear that Agaja's military successes forced the Portuguese to the bargaining table. Eager to maintain trading relationships with Dahomey, the Portuguese agreed to repatriate thousands of enslaved Africans from Brazil. This was monumental, representing one of the few instances in history where a significant number of enslaved Africans were returned to their homeland through diplomatic means. A complex legacy. Agaja's reign demonstrated visionary diplomacy and statecraft. His efforts to repatriate enslaved Africans were unprecedented and highlighted his commitment to preserving Dahomey's independence against European encroachment. Yet his relationship with the transatlantic slave trade remains complex and debated among historians. On one hand, he was a staunch defender of Dahomey's sovereignty, using military force and diplomacy to resist European domination. On the other hand, his kingdom continued participating in the slave trade, capturing and selling prisoners of war to European traders. This paradox reflects the impossible choices faced by African rulers during this era. Despite his military successes, Agaja's reign didn't end the slave trade in Dahomey. The kingdom remained a major participant throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. However, his actions set a precedent for later African leaders who sought to resist European colonialism and protect their people from exploitation. Enduring significance. Agaja's legacy testifies to the complexities of African resistance during the transatlantic slave trade era. His victory over the Portuguese and the repatriation of thousands of enslaved Africans stand as powerful symbols of African agency against European domination. While Dahomey continued as a major player in the slave trade, Agaja's reign demonstrated that African rulers weren't merely passive participants. They could assert power and influence in ways that challenged European interests. In the broader context of African history, Agaja's story highlights the dynamic interplay between African and European powers during the early modern period. His reign reminds us that African states weren't monolithic entities, but complex societies with internal politics, ambitions, and struggles for survival. His victory and his efforts to return enslaved Africans exemplify the resilience and resourcefulness of African leaders facing unprecedented challenges. Today, King Agaja is remembered as one of Africa's greatest kings, a ruler who expanded his kingdom's territory while seeking to protect his people from the ravages of the transatlantic slave trade. His legacy continues to inspire those seeking to understand the complexities of African history and the enduring impact of the slave trade on the continent and its diaspora. In his story, we find not simple heroes or villains, but the profound moral ambiguities and difficult choices that defined an era. And a leader who, despite these contradictions, fought fiercely for his people's dignity and freedom.